Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I thought we'd sit down and I'd go through some hits and some misses from the Book of the Month Club. I've been a member of Book of the Month Club since June of 2017. I did suspend my subscription for a few months, which coincided with the break that I took from BookTube, but I missed it. I always look forward to picking a book at the beginning of the month, and it was a no-brainer for me to reactivate my subscription with them, especially once I started making BookTube videos again. And just to be perfectly honest, I've never had a book or read a book from Book of the Month that I hated. Sure, some of these books don't appeal to me or they're not my taste. I don't think that I've walked away from a Book of the Month book giving it less than 3 stars. I could be wrong, but I sincerely can't think of a Book of the Month book that I've given a rating that low. And to me, 3 stars is an okay book. So it's no surprise. I mean, Book of the Month, by the way, they have absolutely no idea who I am and will never see this video. This is in no way affiliated with or sponsored by Book of the Month. So if you're a member of Book of the Month, then at the beginning of each month, you get a 5-book pool to select from. Your membership is $14.99 a month, I believe, and that gets you 1 book per month. If you want to add more books to your monthly box, they're $9.99 a piece, which I take advantage of very often because it's a new hardcover book for $10, and that's not something that you get very often. The 5 books are selected by people in the industry. They've been book critics, they've been book editors, they've been authors, they've been, I think on occasion, a celebrity here or there. But I mean, the books that you get from Book of the Month should be good because somebody is advocating for this book. Somebody is attaching their name to it and saying that it's great. And people don't typically do that for books that they are not 100% confident in. That said, there have been some true exceptions in the Book of the Month books that I've selected that are just phenomenal, that will go down in history as being some of my favorites. I just want to talk to you today about the ones that I really, really liked and the ones that didn't quite do it for me. I'm going to start with the very first book that I ever ordered from Book of the Month. It was totally new to me. BookTube was totally new to me. And without even realizing it, I selected a young adult book, which was totally new to me. In June of 2017, I chose A Million Junes by Emily Henry. This is the story of 2 rival families in northern Michigan that have a lot of history of bad blood. And 2 young people, one in each family, that kind of have a thing. They have a thing for each other. They're really drawn to each other, attracted to each other. Obviously, their families would never understand. Does this sound familiar? It should. It is sort of like a Romeo and Juliet story. Sure. It's got some fantasy elements, some surreal or speculative moments. It's phenomenal. It's beautiful. It's poetic. Like, I fell in love with Emily Henry's writing in this book, and she was completely unknown to me before this book. And since then, I've purchased 2 more of her books. I just haven't read them yet. The latest being Beach Read. This is the author of Beach Read, which a lot of people around BookTube are reading and loving. This just happens to be a young adult book, and Beach Read happens to be an adult romance. But I can't wait to read Beach Read, and part of the reason is because I absolutely loved A Million June. Shortly thereafter, I think that was in June. This one was in August. Well, I got it in August of 2017, but it was an extra. That is Hunger by Roxanne Gay. This is a nonfiction, a memoir of my body. This book is about the author's relationship to her own body, to food, how the trauma of her past has affected both. And I didn't really, this showed up in my best books that I read in 2017 video. Oh God, that feels like forever ago. But outside of that video, I've never really talked about hunger on BookTube. And part of that is because this book put me into a state of vulnerability that I wasn't really comfortable getting in front of a camera and telling the internet about. But there's a lot that I relate to in this book. Granted, there's some stuff that I don't relate to, and I can never understand the level of trauma that another person goes through. But I definitely connected with the author's experiences being overweight, taking up too much space, wanting to be invisible, all of these things, like trying to prove your worth when you yourself feel worthless. Like, I just really loved this book so much. It's my favorite nonfiction book, believe, that I've ever read. I love memoirs in general. And typically when it comes to memoirs, I lean towards funnier ones. There's nothing funny about this book. This book couldn't be more serious. And it affected me on such a level that has just stuck with me. And I see it on my shelf and almost return back to that same place that I was in when I was reading it. So it's a very powerful book. Roxanne Gay is an incredible woman, very strong in her convictions and not afraid of the conflict that results from that strength. I follow her on Twitter. She's not afraid to tell people to hit the road. I mean, I just want to be that person. I wish that I could be as strong-minded and strong-spirited as Roxanne Gay is. Just absolutely incredible, and I can't wait. I have some of her fiction, and I can't wait to read her fiction as well. Another book that I loved from Book of the Month was The Chalk Man by CJ Tudor. This was a funny story. I actually had an arc of The Chalk Man that I received from the publisher. I requested it, got it, didn't think about it anymore because it was a while before it was coming out. Then Book of the Month released their selections. This book was one of them, and I was like, wow, that book looks really familiar. Why does that book look familiar? I don't think I've ever heard of that book. The title, I mean, there's just something about this that's so familiar. So I selected this. I selected The Chalk Man for the Book of the Month and read it, loved it, realized I had an arc. I have a very strange relationship with this book now. Like, I don't remember much. I remember that the story is a dual narrative, one of which takes place in the past with this friend group, and the present day narrative is about the protagonist of the story as an adult. When he was part of the friend group, they had stumbled upon a dead body. In order to communicate back and forth kind of in secret and without anybody knowing what they were up to, they developed the system of little chalk figures. They would draw chalk figures outside of each other's houses in different colors so you would know exactly who the message came from. And that was how they decided to meet up or where they decided to go, etc. I remember bits and pieces of this book. I definitely could not sit down and tell you a timeline of the novel going plot point to plot point. What I can say is there are two very specific scenes in this book that haunt me to this day. I don't know, since I've never forgotten them, I don't know if I ever will. One of them involves a really shocking and startling scene of gore that has to do with an amusement park accident, and the other is a really upsetting and disturbing instance of bullying and non-consensual sexual acts that are they carved out a place in my brain for this book for eternity, I think. And CJ Tudor as well. The way that CJ Tudor wrote it was so genuine. I remember commenting that the young man, the male protagonist, was so convincing and so genuine and realistic that I assumed CJ Tudor was a guy. was a man. And I was shocked to find out that CJ Tudor is a woman. CJ Tudor has since come out with 2 other books, The Hiding Place, which is also known as The Taking of Annie Thorne, and The Other People. I have The Hiding Place. I have not read it. I read an arc of The Other People. I was not impressed. We'll have to do a tiebreaker for CJ Tudor and read The Hiding Place. This was a good one. I loved it. Another book of the month pick that I actually had an arc of was The Wife Between Us. Now, in this case, I received the arc and read it and loved it. So when Book of the Month offered this as a selection, I snatched it right up. The Wife Between Us by Greer, Hendricks, and Sarah Pekkanen was their first book written together. They've since written 2 more together, one of which is called The Anonymous Girl, and the most recent is You Are Not Alone. Now, mixed feelings about The Anonymous Girl, and I haven't sought out much feedback about You Are Not Alone yet, but The Wife Between Us, people either love it or they hate it. I loved it. I thought it was a very uniquely told story that we've heard 100 times. This is a domestic thriller about an ex-wife, or a soon-to-be ex-wife, whose husband is already engaged to his mistress. This story bobs and weaves. You never know when you're reading about or who you're reading from. It's got some major twists in it that take place relatively early and more at the end, and it's just not what you expect. It advertises itself as the domestic thriller you've read 1,000,000 times, and then turns out it's nothing like any domestic thriller I had read. Sure, there's similar elements in every domestic thriller. They usually deal with marriage in conflict, one of whom is an abuser, the other of whom is an alcoholic, or what have you. Maybe that's the same character in some of the books, but I mean, those elements exist, yes. But this is just so unique in its telling of that story, and really caught me off guard, caught me by surprise, which for a domestic thriller, I would say is kind of tricky to do. Really enjoyed The Wife Between Us, raved about it. It was on my favorites list of 2017. I will leave links to those videos, or at least the video from way back then that I'm least ashamed of out of the 2. We'll see. We'll have to see how that goes. Lastly, for Book of the Month books that I absolutely loved, The Whisper Man by Alex North. Read really recently. This is a crime thriller like no other, the way that The Wife Between Us is a domestic thriller like no other. So this is the story of a man and his son, both of whom are grieving from the loss of their wife and mother, and they move into this small town for a change of pace, a change of scenery, to kind of escape the haunting past that they've just experienced. The Whisper Man was someone 20 years ago in this town who abducted and killed young boys, and prior to taking them would spend some time winning them over by whispering at their window, gaining their confidence, and that's how he was able to abduct them and then subsequently kill them. Someone is repeating the same pattern of criminal behavior. Someone is abducting and killing boys, whispering at their windows, and it's not long before Tom's son Jake experiences that. Creepy as hell. This is another book that I had an arc of and read and loved, and then Book of the Month offered it, and I snatched it up. And to me, it's a big deal when I've already read a book, and in fact, I had a physical copy of The Whisper Man. You know I love a book if I've already read it, have a copy of it, and still get the Book of the Month copy, instead of picking out something else that month, or carrying my credit over to the next month. You know I love a book when I take a book I've already read from Book of the Month. What did I love? I loved Alex North's writing. I believe this is his debut novel. I am not the biggest crime thriller fan. Sometimes crime thrillers are boring for me, especially if they lean too much towards the procedural side of things. Granted, they're still a thriller, so I'm still picking it up before I pick up a lot of other genres, but they're just not my favorite type. And I went into this crime thriller willingly because it seemed so stinking creepy, and I was all about the creepy. Turns out it's very creepy, but it's also deeply emotional. More than any other crime thriller I've ever read in my life. Crime thrillers are not known, from my perspective, to be emotionally engaging books, and this was just incredible. The most significant part of which is these portraits of fatherhood that are told throughout the book. So you've got Tom and his son Jake, obviously, but you get a couple of other glimpses into the father-son relationship in their different forms that just make this so profound. Like, it's just the most profound crime thriller that I've ever read. Book of the Month just offered Alex North's second or follow-up book to this, The Shadows. That's always impressive when the judges of Book of the Month come back for more. It's just so good, and it's a little bit more on the dramatic side than it is on the action-packed side. But I know that there's an audience for that. I wouldn't have guessed that I was in the audience for that, but I loved this book. I would say, if you like, I believe I recommended it to people who prefer like character-driven thrillers. And that is exactly what it is. That is exactly true. That's what you get with The Whisper Man. Now let's talk about some Book of the Month picks that I maybe wasn't so crazy about. I'll talk about the ones that I've actually unhauled first. The first was Ghosted by Rosie Walsh. This was a DNF for me. I just didn't connect. And I don't know if I was in a weird place emotionally or what the deal was, but I wanted to be really connected with this story. I just wasn't. The character that had been ghosted bothered me, and I knew right from the get-go that, you know, I can't afford to be bothered by either my hero or my heroine in a romance novel. I really need to adore them. And Ghosted was a Pick My Book selection, so I felt doubly bad about DNFing it, but I did read another one in its place that month. I can't explain it other than that. I can't really explain the book. It's about a woman who thinks she's met her soulmate, and she knows they have to spend some time apart, but they agree to meet back up when that time comes. He doesn't show. She's been ghosted. I don't know what happens after that because I didn't read it, but I was just immediately turned off. And I'm not mad about it. I can't say that I hate the book. I didn't read the damn book. So I'm not mad about it, and I'm actually willing to admit that it could have turned out to be one of those at least 3-star reads from Book of the Month, but I don't think we'll ever know. The other Book of the Month selection that I have unhauled is The Bride Test by Helen Hoang. And this is a bit controversial because there are a lot of people out there that love The Bride Test. I, for one, loved The Kiss Quotient. It was the first book in this series of related books by the author, and I was so excited for The Bride Test. I thought that I was going to love it, and I didn't. I didn't love it. I grabbed it up from Book of the Month. I read it right away and just was a little bit disappointed. Part of that disappointment, I'm willing to admit, could have been my own expectations. The story is about Kai, who's on the spectrum, and he's so rigid and convinced he's unfeeling that he has no intention of finding love or a partner for life. So his mother, who's traveling to Vietnam, finds Esme, who's desperate to get out of her country and make a better life for her and her daughter. And Kai's mother offers to bring Esme to America if she agrees to marry Kai. There were just a couple of off-putting things about it that I couldn't get past. One was the interference in Kai's life by his mother, but it's real bold to bring a woman home from another country, move her into your son's house, and convince him that he has to marry her. It's just extreme. It's a little bit extreme. The second part was that Esme inserts herself into Kai's life and doesn't listen. I found myself siding with Kai. I found myself feeling a lot of the frustrations that I imagine that Kai felt when all of this was happening without his approval, without his input. And it just stressed me out. Now, granted, it's a romance novel. It all works out in the end. We all know that. But to me, that's absolute best case unlikely scenario, because under these set of circumstances, I would be pissed. I just didn't want to be reminded of those feelings. So I unhauled it. It's, Helen Hoang is doing great things for the romance genre. Both the bride test and the kiss quotient are super relevant to the conversation about romance and where it's going or where it needs to go, etc. It frustrated me. It frustrated me more than it entertained me, and that's a problem for me when it comes to romance. Another controversial miss for me from Book of the Month was No Exit by Taylor Adams. This was another Pick My Book winner, and after finishing this and not liking it, I felt so guilty that I read another book. I read another one of the Pick My Book choices because I didn't want anybody to hate me. No Exit is so hyped and so well loved across BookTube, across the reading world in general, I guess. And again, this is probably a case of too high expectations. Hyping the book up so much or believing in the hype so much and then expecting it to be nonstop action or live up to the most suspensefully terrifying book that I ever read. It just didn't. And the major problem for me when it came to No Exit was the antagonist. I had a couple of problems with characters, which I explained in my review video, but primarily, if I get down to the nitty-gritty, the antagonist, I didn't take them seriously. I didn't think they were capable of the things that the author had them executing in the story. I didn't think they were scary. I didn't respect the antagonist as a threat. And so I never felt the fear or the suspense that everybody else feels and gets to feel when they read this book. I wish that I did. At the end of the day, I didn't. Now, that's not to say this was an awful book. Again, Taylor Adams' writing was great. I just questioned some of the decisions and the way that those decisions made me feel about the reading experience. So I'm still disappointed that I can't tell you guys that I love this book because so many people love it. And I just feel like it's me. I've kept it on my shelf because part of me thinks I might need to reread it and revisit and re-examine my feelings on it. This is the most unconfident 3-star I've ever given in my life. This next one is tricky because I actually rated it highly. I gave this book 4 stars. It's The Woman in the Window by A.J. Finn. I liked it. It was well written. The reason that it's on my missed list, the reason this one didn't quite hit it out of the park or knock it out of the park for me is because, again, my expectations were too high. There were people who were raving about this book, not just based on story or suspense, the way that they were about No Exit, but I mean, people were saying this was the most well-written book they'd ever read. And then I read it, and it was good. But it was just good. This book didn't trick me. I saw this book for what it was. I knew where this was going. I called it very early on. There was one surprise for me in this book that I didn't realize was going to be the case, but it was also something that didn't really draw your attention. So it turned out to be a tad bit disappointing, even though it's still a really good book. I would read something by A.J. Finn again, regardless of who the author is or what the author has done. The writing was really good. I mean, the writing is phenomenal. And I wish I had the talent that this author has for stringing a bunch of sentences together. I don't. I just wish that it had blown me away the way that it did with everyone else. And finally, I'm going to talk about these books together. They shouldn't come as any surprise. I've talked about this recently, but The Final Girls and Home Before Dark, both by Riley Sager. They're the first book published by Riley Sager, the most recent book published by Riley Sager, also the only 2 by Riley Sager that I've read. both of which are good. I didn't really rage or hate on either of these books. They're good. My main problem isn't the way that I feel about the book after I've read it. My problem is the experience of reading it. The way that Riley Sager writes, the devices that are used to generate the mystery and of the novels. I just have realized that this style may not be for me. I referred to them in my Home Before Dark review as Scooby-Doo revelations, where, you know, you're presented with a pool of allies who seem very helpful for the majority of the book, and then there's a big mask pull reveal. It almost makes you feel bad for trusting this person. And I'm not digging it. I'm not there for it. I'm not liking that. And this could totally be just a phase. And so I'm not trashing Riley Sager's books. I'm not committed to never, ever, ever reading Riley Sager again. I'm just saying that these didn't work for me because right now I'm in a space. I don't like the trickery involved in telling me a story the way that Riley Sager tells me a story. I mean, and that, to be honest with you, The Woman in the Window contains a bit of a Scooby-Doo reveal in it as well. And that sucks. That could also be that could also be a reason that this didn't work well for me, even though I read this book long before I realized I didn't like the Scooby-Doo reveal. And now I know. No Scooby-Doo reveals for me. So there you have it. Those are my biggest hits and biggest misses from the Book of the Month Club since joining in 2017. When you look back on the books that are offered by Book of the Month, I don't think that those books became what they became because of Book of the Month. It feels like Book of the Month just got there and said, oh my gosh, this book is going to be huge. This book is great. Let's offer this book. You know what I mean? In some cases, yes, the book's popularity and subsequent success could be related directly to Book of the Month's involvement, but I don't think so. I just get the impression that they're really good at figuring out which books are going to make waves, and they've come through for me more often than not. They've not steered me completely wrong in 99% of cases. So I'm not here to advocate for you to join Book of the Month. In fact, I know that there are controversies surrounding Book of the Month. I know that Book of the Month is only available in the United States. There's lots of reasons that people might not find this service useful to them, and that's completely cool. I just wanted to talk about some really great books that I've read, and books that I've read that I thought would be really great that weren't, and it just so happens all those books are from Book of the Month. Okay. I'm done. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comment section below about the books that I mentioned and about Book of the Month as a service itself. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all very soon.